Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be going over my most unpopular Call of Duty multiplayer opinions, just the opinions that I have shared over the past years that I feel like go against what the majority of the community seems to think. We're going to start off this video going over what I think are the most overrated and underrated Call of Duty multiplayers, and then we'll get into some more just general topics about Call of Duty multiplayers over the past 2 decades. Starting off with the most overrated Call of Duty multiplayers, remember, overrated just means that I personally don't think this multiplayer is nearly as good as most people say. That does not mean I think these multiplayers are bad. Maybe some of these I think are bad, but for the most part, I don't think all of these are bad. I just don't think they're nearly as good as a lot of the community makes them out to be. First of all, I'm going to go with World at War. I understand this is definitely a very nostalgic game for a lot of people. It's very nostalgic for me as well. I've been playing Call of Duty since 2006. I was there during this game's life cycle. I played the multiplayer. Now, to be fair, I was very young at the time. I was like 8 years old, so I really didn't get maybe as immersed into the Call of Duty franchise as a lot of other people may have if they were a bit older during that time, but I still played it enough to experience it during that time. I played a lot more split screen than anything, to be honest. I wasn't, too crazy with the online mode, but once the, future Call of Duty started coming out, I went back to World at War pretty frequently to try it out over the years. And I've just never been able to absolutely fall in love with it like a lot of other people have. I think the only real positive things about this multiplayer are, of course, the gun sounds and the atmosphere. I think all that's really cool, and I like a lot of the maps in the game as well. But the overall gameplay is just so clunky. It's got some of the worst hit detection in the franchise. I'd actually argue it is the worst hit detection in the franchise, which ultimately ruins the gun balance because a lot of guns just don't work well with the time to kill already being kind of slow, and then also having, really bad hit detection on top of that, which makes guns like the MP40 end up being completely dominant on pretty much every map. It's also not very innovative. I mean, compared to COD 4, COD 4 did so much for multiplayers, where I feel like World at War just kind of repeated exactly what COD 4 did, but with a World War II skin. It had a great campaign. I think the zombies mode, obviously it was the first one, but it was great for its time. The multiplayer though, I never really was able to latch onto, so it ended up being one of my least favorite multiplayer experiences, to be completely honest. And now we have the OG Modern Warfare 2, and to be completely honest, I do think the OG Modern Warfare 2 is a good multiplayer. I do like it, but I don't think it's a masterpiece. Obviously, majority of people think this is one of the best Call of Duties ever, and I used to say that, don't get me wrong. Back in 2009, back in 2010, even up until like maybe 2013, I thought this was one of the best Call of Duties ever. I thought it was one of the best multiplayers ever because I had a ton of fun on it when it first came out. I had a blast, but over time, it started to show its flaws more often, and I ended up thinking it's actually quite overrated, and now today, I do think it's one of the most overrated Call of Duty games. I still think it's pretty solid overall. It's still a fine multiplayer experience. I think it was incredibly innovative, and obviously, I do think it's better than the new Modern Warfare 2 that came out in 2022, so keep that in mind, obviously, but again, this multiplayer just has so many balance issues with it that to me kind of take away from the experience. I think the maps are a bit overrated, even though some of them are fun, obviously, but overall, I don't think the map, pool is as amazing as a lot of people say, and there's just a lot of other technical issues that just kind of hold it back for me. But overall, still a decent, and I would even say good multiplayer experience. Next up, I have the OG Modern Warfare 3, and I actually do think the new Modern Warfare 3 that just came out a couple months ago, I actually think that one's better than the OG Modern Warfare 3, at least in terms of the multiplayer, which is what we're talking about today. If we're talking about campaign, obviously the OG Modern Warfare 3 campaign blows the new one out of the water, but I do actually prefer how the new one plays quite a bit. This OG Modern Warfare 3 game, I don't know, I always thought it improved on the OG Modern Warfare 2 in a lot of ways, but it also kind of took a lot of steps backwards as well, especially in terms of the maps. I already thought the map pool in Modern Warfare 2 wasn't that great, but I thought the map pool in this game was even worse. I really wasn't a fan of a lot of the maps. I thought the game looked really ugly as well. The campaign looked good, but somehow the multiplayer, it just didn't translate. It was one of the grayest and just ugliest color palettes I've ever seen for a Call of Duty game. Obviously, there's a lot of development issues with this Call of Duty as well. It was around the time where Infinity Ward split up to kind of make a new studio called Respawn, and then they ended up going and making Titanfall. Obviously, all that happened, and that kind of affected how this game was developed, which ended up making a lot of the, assets being reused from Modern Warfare 2, which is actually why the game feels so similar to Modern Warfare 2 in a lot of ways, but it still is its own game. I think there's some really cool things they added. I like the whole specialist streaks that they added, and there was a lot of other innovations that I personally liked, like point streaks, for example, that completely changed how the kill streak system works. But overall, it had a lot of balance issues. was kind of in terms of the feel of the actual game. The movement felt a bit clunky in some aspects, but I still think it's an okay Call of Duty multiplayer. I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's quite overrated. And lastly, for the overrated Call of Duties, I have Modern Warfare 2019. And depending on like who you talk to and what parts of the internet you're on, you might be thinking to yourself right now, like, what are you talking about, Fusion? This game is certainly not overrated because nobody even rates it that high. Everyone shits on this game. And honestly, it depends where you're looking, to be honest, because I've seen a lot of hate for this Call of Duty multiplayer, for sure, but I've also seen way more praise, and especially since Modern Warfare 2 2022 came out, this game has gotten a lot more praise over the past year or two. And with Modern Warfare 3 coming out as well, like, so many people are looking more fondly on this multiplayer, and I just can't agree. I think this is one of the worst multiplayers of all time. I think it's worse than the new Modern Warfare 2. I think it's obviously worse than the new Modern Warfare 3. I think it's worse than Vanguard. I think it is easily one of the worst multiplayer experiences. It completely changed a lot to the multiplayer formula, obviously with the minimap changes and the dead silence changes, the time to kill being the fastest it's ever been, the heavy focus on realism, which ultimately was kind of stupid to begin with, but there's just so many things this multiplayer experience did that I dreaded and I thought was awful. And I remember when this game was out, even just from the beta, I already was sitting there going, oh my God, this is the first time in years I think a multiplayer is not good, which honestly was a kind of a surprise for me because there were so many years straight where I was loving every Call of Duty multiplayer that came out. You'll see, later on this video, there's plenty of Call of Duty that came out before this that I loved and I was obsessed with throughout the whole life cycle. But this one, instantly from the beta, I was like, what happened here? They completely changed what they were working towards and ended up making, in my opinion, just a very bad multiplayer experience. I don't care how good the graphics are. I don't care about any of that. Obviously, it made a lot of good changes in terms of like free DLC, and it got rid of supply drops, which we'll talk about later because I actually don't think that's entirely a good thing. But there's obviously some other cool things like crossplay. I just think overall, the way the game was designed was pretty bad. So it's definitely one of the most overrated Call of Duties in my opinion. And now let's get into the most underrated Call of Duty games, which again, this does not mean I think all of these are great or even good multiplayer experiences. I just think they're a lot better than people make them out to be. And we're gonna start this off with Infinite Warfare. And honestly, it's one of my favorite multiplayers of all time. It's honestly probably my top 4 at this point. It's gone up and up and up over the years. When it was first out, I didn't even think it was that incredible of a game. And I honestly think that's mainly because of how much negativity was surrounding this multiplayer. It was kind of hard to enjoy it. Like, it's so hard to enjoy something when you constantly have people online telling you it sucks and you can't even enjoy it. Like, I remember making positive videos on it during that time when this game was out, and I was trying to tell people, like, I was 17 at the time or 16, whatever, and I was trying to say, like, okay, we should give this game a chance. We should try it out. We should try to enjoy it at least. And I got so much hate. It wasn't even funny. Obviously my channel was very small at the time, but the little people that were there just constantly were berating me for even liking even just small parts of this game. So it was hard to really just get into it. None of my friends bought it, or some of them did, but they barely played it. So I ended up just going back to Black Ops 3 most of this year and just not really playing Infinite Warfare. And I kind of just subconsciously had it lower on my list because I didn't really have fun with it because of all that negativity. But once World War II came out, once Black Ops 4 came out, obviously today as well, like, over time, not only have other people been able to accept that this game actually was pretty solid, but they've also just kind of stopped talking about it, the ones who still hate it. So it's a lot easier to go back to it and just enjoy it and just take it all in. And I've never had more fun going back to a multiplayer than I have with Infinite Warfare, especially during like COVID when that whole thing happened. I went back to Infinite Warfare. I had such a good time because Infinite Warfare, it genuinely is one of the best Call of Duty games. It's basically like Black Ops 3 in terms of its design, very similar in that sense, but it honestly fixes a lot of the problems Black Ops 3 had. The specialists, in my opinion, aren't as bad in this game. They actually kind of work a little bit better with the gameplay. I think the supply drop system overall is a lot more fair and actually has a lot more things to grind for in game. I love the space setting. There's just so much to love about Infinite Warfare multiplayer. The campaign's a masterpiece, the zombies is really fun too, but the multiplayer I think is really underlooked and is easily the most underrated multiplayer experience of all time, and it's unfortunate so many people around the world just never got a chance to play it because everyone was so negative about this game that nobody even wanted to bother trying it. Next up, I'm gonna go with Call of Duty World War II, and this game is kind of hard to talk about in terms of what the community thinks about it because I honestly think there's a lot of people who loved it quite a bit, and there's also a lot of people who hated it. It's kind of like, split down the middle. I think this is one of the most average Call of Duty games in terms of the community opinion on it. Obviously, for me personally, I do think the multiplayer was actually really good. I think it's one of the better COD multiplayers. And even though I didn't like it nearly as much as Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, and definitely not as much as Black Ops 4 either, I thought it was still a really fun multiplayer, and I had a blast with it throughout its life cycle. I think the launch was a bit rough. There was a lot of issues with the game, but over time they stabilized things. They fixed things with the big, overhaul that they did in April of that year's life cycle, which completely changed the class system and made it a lot better. And that's when I think the game started to really get like a solid reputation and people started to actually really like it. But unfortunately, a lot of people dropped it before that update even happened. And then now in the future, like it's even better because they made a lot of, changes with the microtransaction system. So it's a lot more interesting. There's a lot more stuff to grind for, and you can get all the DLC guns pretty easily. And yeah, it's got a good design. It has that classic COD feel to it, but in the same sense, it has more, modern mechanics. And I think it really works well. Next, I got Black Ops 4, which is also really hard to talk about because I do feel like the community's opinion on it also is very different. And just like World War II and even Infinite Warfare, I think it really depends on how much you played it past its life cycle. Because during the life cycle, there was a lot of problems with it and a lot of people had a lot of hate on it. But especially once you got later in the season, and even today, 100%, it is so much better than it was when it first came out. And partially because of the microtransaction overhaul that they did after the game's life cycle was up, but also just the player base in general. I don't know, people who still play that game today, they're really fun to play against. Obviously, the skill-based matchmaking isn't as crazy as it is in Modern Warfare 2019 and onward. So in this game, I don't know, it's one of the most enjoyable experiences because of all the mechanics. The time to kill changes were really cool. I thought the manual healing was really fun as well. A lot of people don't like that, but I personally thought it was really cool. The specialist is like one of the only things I don't like about this game, but I don't think it ruins the game either. I think there's definitely a place for them in the game, and it doesn't like, completely destroy my enjoyment of it. It's just sometimes they're kind of annoying to die by. The streaks are really fun. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff to grind for, which is, the same with Infinite Warfare and World War II. So personally, I think I had a ton of fun during the life cycle with this game, but just like the past two games, I had even more fun after the life cycle. And lastly, I actually have Call of Duty Vanguard, which sounds crazy to so many people, and you might be wondering, like, how could I even say that when I was very negative on the game? Like, I made so many videos talking about how much I did not find this game to be interesting. I called it boring many times. Like, I had a lot of issues with Vanguard, but I still do think it's underrated. And I stand by that. I do think it's not a good Call of Duty game. I don't think it's a good multiplayer. I think it's pretty it's not really on the level of like awful though. That's what I mean. Like I think it's underrated because I don't think it's this terrible, awful thing that deserves to be the worst Call of Duty game ever, which is what most people say online. I think it's probably one of the most hated Call of Duty games ever, which is crazy because obviously there's a lot of other games that had a lot more hate. But especially like currently, if I were to make a whole list of voting, what's the worst game, and everyone in the community was to vote, I do think Vanguard would get the most votes. So I just don't agree with that though. I don't think it's even close to the worst. I think the Modern Warfare 2 that came out recently, Modern Warfare 2019, I think COD Ghosts, I think there's quite a few Call of Duty games I think are way worse than Vanguard. Vanguard's multiplayer actually improves on Modern Warfare 2019 in quite a few places. For example, they actually added a perk that gave you the classic minimap. Now, of course, I'd rather that be by default like it is in Modern Warfare 3, but it was at least good to have it as a perk instead of not having it at all. The maps are also a lot better in Vanguard, which a lot of people don't really give the maps any credit because they just don't like the gameplay itself, which I understand there are some problems with the gameplay, but I think the maps are pretty good. It's one of the better map pools we've seen over the past few years. Sledgehammer knows how to make good maps, and we're seeing that with Modern Warfare 3 with their multiplayer maps. They're making some good DLC maps. I'm, fully expecting the rest of them to be even better. But Vanguard's maps, I mean, I don't know, I had a lot of fun with them. And when they added that slow time to kill mode, which really fixed the game for me, I had the most fun I've had in Call of Duty in a long time. Like, it was so much fun. I made so many videos on it because I was having a blast. I was getting nukes left and right because there was an actual skill gap to Call of Duty Vanguard, which was not something I was expecting. And I fucking loved it. The movement in this game is really good as well, aside from things like the ADS speed, but generally speaking, I do think the movement is pretty good, especially just how fast you can get around the map. It's really fun. So in general, I do think this is quite an underrated Call of Duty game, although I don't think it's good, obviously. And now let's get into some more general unpopular opinions about Call of Duty multiplayers. And the first one I want to start with is probably one of my biggest ones that I've argued with so many people about over the past few years. And this is that the better supply drop systems, and when I mean the better ones, I mean like the actual ones that weren't awful, like Black Ops 3 and Advanced Warfare, but the better systems like Infinite Warfare, World War II, Black Ops 4 post-overhaul, and even Modern Warfare Remastered, those systems are much better than the current microtransaction system that we've had since Modern Warfare 2019 with all the bundles and the battle passes and all that crap. And let me explain, because whenever I say this, I feel like there's so many people who argue against things that honestly, it's hard to really get a good argument going, because a lot of things people will say, I agree with. Like, their counterpoints I agree with, but I still think this system is not as good as the one we had in those games with those decent supply drop systems. Let me explain. I want to start off by saying I do not think supply drops should return for many reasons. I don't think they ever will because of legal reasons, but generally speaking, they're not good because of the whole gambling aspect of them, and there's definitely better systems that could exist, and there's obviously a lot of potential for bad systems because of supply drops. And honestly, these supply drops themselves were never the good parts of some of those good systems. There's other aspects to those supply drop systems that I think really made them work, and they weren't terrible, but the supply drops themselves were never really that good. And also, the way they handle DLC guns now is certainly better than how they handled DLC guns before. But remember, DLC guns are not the only part of a supply drop or even just microtransaction system. In terms of cosmetics especially, I think just the way the supply drop systems were handled was a lot more interesting than what we have now, because nowadays, 99% of cosmetics are thrown into the bundles or the battle pass, and they will specifically put the best looking stuff through like $24 bundles. Getting one blueprint for one weapon with maybe like one operator skin or something for $24 is insane. And sometimes they'll throw a second one in there and they'll throw a bunch of stickers, whatever, emblems, but none of that stuff really matters. All that stuff is like filler. You're really only buying it for like one or two items. And yes, for $24, that is madness. Insane. And you cannot get it for free. There is not a single way to get most of those items for free. Now, the battle pass, you also have to pay for. It is not a free battle pass. Now, if you keep doing every battle pass, yes, you can eventually get them for free because you earn COD points in them, but it's not really free because time is money. I know that's such a cheesy statement, but time is genuinely money, and to complete a battle pass does take a while. Like, I think I play Call of Duty more than the average person quite a bit, and even I have trouble completing the battle pass sometimes because, yeah, sometimes I just don't have the time for it, and I end up being stuck at like tier 80 or something, and the new season's coming, and wow, I just lost out on 20 tiers worth of content because I just simply couldn't finish it in time. I just didn't have the time to play it. And it's basically forcing you to play the game for a longer period of time just to get the other stuff. It's quite a manipulative system, which I know you can choose not to buy it simply, but like if you do buy it, then you're kind of stuck in that situation where you have to keep playing the game. Even if you don't like it, you're going to feel like you have to because you want to get your money's worth. And if you don't finish it, you have to pay more money to get what you want, which is insanity. And the only free cosmetics they throw into the game are obviously like the base mastery camos, which do look good, don't get me wrong, but even those don't really hold up to like the best looking cosmetics in the game through the bundles. I feel like a lot of the master crafts, a lot of the blueprints, whatever you call them nowadays, just look a lot better than the master camos do. And honestly, there's so many mastery camos in Modern Warfare 3, for example, that most people don't even recognize them as easily as they would. Obviously, hardcore fans will, but most people in the game, they're not going to see that and go, oh my god, you got the mastery camo. They might just see it as another random camo because honestly, there's so many of them and they don't look like that crazy. You go back to Black Ops 3, when you had Dark Matter, everyone was like, oh shit, this guy has Dark Matter. Like they were pissing their pants. You had Diamond ARs in Black Ops 2, people were shitting themselves. But honestly, nowadays, I feel like nobody cares. They just know you just play the game a lot. But even then, they don't even recognize it half the time. So I don't know. Personally, there's just not enough free cosmetics to actually earn the game. Obviously, they do events every now and then. But again, the event, stuff is usually not that cool looking. The stuff in the bundles always look better. But guess what? With the supply drop systems, at least some of them, not all of them, some of them, you were able to directly get what you want. You can go into the collections, use your salvage, use whatever you have, whatever you earned in game to directly purchase that. Black Ops 4 went a step further where you can literally just use the stuff you earned in the game, which was the reserves, to just directly purchase a bunch of different items. You had a bunch of different master crafts available to you. Obviously, the DLC guns were there too, and some different skins as well that you find in the shop, and it refreshes every day so you can come back and check what's new. And I think that's pretty cool. You also have an option to use your COD points in Black Ops 4 as well. So if you want to directly buy them just like it's a bundle, you could do that if you want. You don't have to, but you could. You go to World War II, which I think is the best supply drop system we ever had. So many options for directly purchasing items, which is really fun, really replayable. Modern Warfare Remastered has the same thing. Unfortunately, Infinite Warfare does not have really any cosmetics that are available to directly purchase. All the cosmetics are just strictly from supply drops. so you have to just get lucky. But honestly, I earn enough supply drops, I end up getting cool stuff anyways. It's not exactly what you might want, but I actually think there's a charm to that where you just have a bunch of random cosmetics that you earn through the game rather than directly seeking out certain things that are added to the game. I actually thought that made it a little bit more fun. Black Ops 3 and Advanced Warfare had a lot of issues because there was really no way to directly purchase anything, so those games were definitely not good with their systems. I do not at all, I don't think those are better than what we have today because there was just nothing good about them. It was all RNG. There was really no way to directly earn things aside from a few minor things, and Advanced Warfare in the the later parts of the game added a way to actually directly get some of the variants through master prestiges, which was cool, don't get me wrong, but just not enough done, especially during the life cycle, that made it, kind of annoying in my opinion. And there was just so much to grind in those games, man. Every time I go back to Infinite Warfare, MWR, World War II, or Black Ops 4, I know I have so many things I can grind for in that game, and I'm directly grinding towards a lot of those things as well. Infinite Warfare, I'm still going back to it very frequently to try to get some of those variants I never got, and I can directly purchase a lot of them with salvage, which is so cool. I love grinding, zombies or multiplayer, whatever it may be, just to try to earn those variants. It's a lot of fun, and it honestly makes the games way more replayable. With the new games, you're just playing to do a battle pass, and honestly, battle passes, they're just not that interesting. I don't know. They're not. Everyone's getting the same things. I don't really care. Next, let's talk about maps a little bit, because obviously maps is one of the most important pillars of a Call of Duty experience. And personally, I think Call of Duty still makes great maps even today. And there's so many people in the community who always talks about how COD can't make good maps anymore. The devs have, ruined their ability to make good maps. And I don't think anybody who actually says that fully believes it themselves, because if that was the case, you wouldn't be playing these games anymore. You just wouldn't be. Like, maps are pretty important. If you thought all the maps were terrible still and there's just nothing good anymore and there hasn't been anything good since like Black Ops 2, like, why are you still playing these games? Like, you can't tell me you're still playing these games if you don't think they make good maps anymore. I don't understand that mentality. Sure, you can say you're just playing them for the remakes and the remasters, but I mean, there's not like enough in the game for that to fully make up for it. Obviously, like Modern Warfare 3 is a bit different with all the MW2 maps remastered, but in general, like most of these games, there's a lot of new maps in them. So, I mean, if you're just trying to play just for the classics, I don't know. It's a weird mentality, in my opinion, but I think they still make great maps. Mostly with Treyarch and Sledgehammer maps. I do think Infinity Ward still has a lot of issues with their map design. They didn't in Infinite Warfare. Infinite Warfare actually has some really great maps, but Call of Duty Ghosts, Modern Warfare 2019, and the recent Modern Warfare 2, I do think has had a lot of issues with bad maps. And I think it's because they've been trying to push these games in more of a realism-centric feel where the maps are a lot more complex. There's a lot more, camping areas. And obviously they had the whole mentality about having as many little camping rooms as possible, that as they call them, safe spaces. I definitely think those maps are pretty bad. But even then, there were some good maps sprinkled in. I think the Ghost DLC maps are pretty great. I think Modern Warfare 2 actually had a lot of good maps in the game, even though there was some stinkers as well. But there were some pretty cool ones. I thought Crown Raceway was really fun. I think a lot of the ones that they brought over to Modern Warfare 3, like Mercado Las Almas, is also really great. So there's definitely some good ones mixed in. Just generally speaking, I think Infinity Ward has had more trouble. But Treyarch has done a fantastic job. Sledgehammer even has done a fantastic job. There's only a select few of Sledgehammer's maps from World War II and Vanguard that I think were like that bad. There's not that many, to be honest. Treyarch has just been nailing it in terms of maps. I don't think they have made many bad maps over the past couple games they've made, to be honest. That's just my opinion. I know Black Ops 4's DLC had some problems. I don't know what they were doing there. They made the maps way too big, but they were good maps. They were just way too big, so they didn't work well most of the time. But if you had a lobby where people were like playing really fast and moving around, then they were usually more fun. But Black Ops 4's launch maps were incredible. I love Seaside, Hacienda, Icebreaker, Contraband being one of my favorite maps of all time. So there's definitely been a lot of great maps over the past decade with Call of Duty. It's obviously hard to beat the GOATs of Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 in terms of the map pools, but I still think there's a lot of great ones recently that do compete with it. Next, let's talk about the Pick 10 class system, which personally I think is the superior class system in Call of Duty. I think it's way better than the recent Gunsmith class systems that they've been doing the past few Call of Duties. Now, there has been some decent changes, like for example in Cold War with the wildcards, and now of course with Modern Warfare 3 using the vests, which kind of work like wildcards in a sense, but they're not exactly wildcards completely. But I still think I prefer Pick 10 from any Call of Duty was in, including Pick 13 from Advanced Warfare. Those systems just, to me, had a lot more replayability. There was a lot more customization there, and they were just more balanced as well. I think the systems recently have been kind of all over the place. I do think there's definitely a way for them to mix Pick 10 with Gunsmith, which I do think Treyarch will be doing for COD 2024, because there has already been a lot of rumors that Sledgehammer was planning a full Pick 10 Gunsmith hybrid system for Modern Warfare 3, but apparently Infinity Ward made them change it for some reason. I don't know why, I don't really understand why, but there was a Pick 10 Gunsmith hybrid in the works. I really hope that comes out, because in my opinion, Gunsmith, just as it is currently with the systems recently, I just haven't really been enjoying it that much. It's really uninteresting. There's really not enough customization between the class itself. Obviously, the attachments, there's a lot of options there, but when it comes to the full class, there's just not enough places to mix and match what you have on your class. And I think classes were just a lot more interesting to make back in Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, and, you know, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 2, all those games were just way more fun to make classes. I really haven't enjoyed the making of classes that much with Gunsmith. I think Gunsmith itself has a lot of cool features, don't get me wrong, but they have to try to combine it with Pick 10 in order to make there be more customization than there's ever been before in COD history. Next, let's quickly talk about Scorestreaks and the fact that I think Scorestreaks should be the default system in every single Call of Duty game going forward. And it's a shame that they started going back to using kill streaks, which I don't really understand why. And now they have the killstreak scorestreak toggle system within the past 2 Call of Duties, which I personally don't like that system that much, to be completely honest. The reason I don't like it, it's obviously better than not having score streaks at all, but the reason I don't like it is because a lot of people will use the kill streaks by default, and it also leads to a lot of other things that should exist that don't exist. Like, for example, streaks aren't loopable when you have this toggle. For some reason, I don't know why, they could easily make them loopable regardless, but what I mean by that is you can keep getting the same streak in the same life. So for example, if you earn a UAV, you earn your second streak and you earn your third streak, you can still earn that UAV again, and then earn your second streak again, your third streak again, in that same life, and just keep going and going and going until you die. But in the recent games, you can't do that, and with these score streak toggles, for some reason, you can't do that. So if they just had only score streaks, I think they would probably let the looping happen. And also, there's other problems that come up with, like, for example, some streaks cost the same amount of kills or score to get, and that means you can't use both of them at the same time, which again, there's ways they could definitely fix that even with keeping the toggle, but I'd rather they just remove the toggle so we don't deal with that problem anymore, have every streak be a different value, so you can use any combination of streaks in the game that you want, so you have a full range of customization to your streaks. I know a lot of people prefer kill streaks for whatever reason. I never really understood it because they've been able to perfect score streaks in a way where it doesn't really matter what mode you're playing, you're still going to be earning them in the same way. And they did this recently with Modern Warfare 2 and now with Modern Warfare 3, where you earn a 125 score per kill in Team Deathmatch. So people wanting kill streaks in Team Deathmatch, it doesn't really make any sense anymore, because score streaks, they were able to make them work just as well in TDM as they do in the other modes. So there's really no reason to ever use kill streaks. So I don't know why we can't just remove kill streaks and just have score streaks by default, so nobody is stuck using kill streaks, because a lot of people don't even know about them. I'm not even kidding. There's many casual players I've talked to that don't even know score streaks are in this game. They don't know the toggle even exists, or they just don't know that score streaks are better, so they just stick to kill streaks and then they don't play the objective. So I think they definitely should change that for the future games. And the final thing I want to discuss is actually about specialists. And I know I talked about specialists earlier in this video where I didn't really like any of the systems they ever did, but I do think specialists should return someday. They would just have to massively change how they work. And I don't know if this is really considered unpopular opinion, but I just think that the overall idea of specialists returning is definitely unpopular. But if it was to be like the system I'm about to provide, I think a lot of people would actually be more on board. So essentially just make them the way they were before, but any passive abilities would be that same way, where you just have to wait for it to recharge and then you get to use it. But if it's a lethal ability, like a weapon, for example, like pulling out, grenade launcher, like the War Machine from Black Ops 3, or the Ragnaroks, or something crazy that does a lot of damage, basically, and kills people, and basically was free kills back in those games, it would instead be turned into a 4th score streak. So players can now have, instead of just 3 score streaks, a 4th one, but that 4th one is specifically tied to the specialist. So for example, let's say you're playing Black Ops 3, you have your 4 score streaks, maybe you're running UAV, counter UAV, and the VSAT or something like that. And you're also running, let's say, Firebreak. And now Firebreak, you get to use the ability with, the Firebreak thing that like emits that fire blast. I forget what it was called. Heat Wave, I believe it was called, the one that you do that. So that's kind of a passive ability. I know it can kill, but it's more so passive. So you use that, but you can also use the flamethrower, but it's now a 4th score streak, so it's going to cost you maybe like 800 score or something. So if you're able to get 800 score, you can now use it, and you can keep reusing it every time you get 800 score. and you get to use it for a limited time, limited amount of ammo, however it was in those games. And you still have your 3 other score streaks, and you still get to use the passive ability. I just think that would be a way more interesting and also fair way to do specialists, and in my opinion, would be really fun. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below of these unpopular opinions. Do you agree with these unpopular opinions? Do you disagree with them? Personally, I think these are probably the only ones that are like really unpopular that I have. I'm sure there's some other ones out there that I just couldn't think of, but generally speaking, I think these are my most unpopular opinions about the Call of Duty multiplayer franchise. So I will see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Peace out.